Ever get that feeling like you're just on the edge of something big? Like maybe your luck's about to change.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of hope. That's what fairies kind of meant to folks back in the day in early modern Britain.
Interesting.
Not the QC Tinkerbell types we see now, though.
Mm-hmm.
This is way more uh, grounded, real, and honestly, a bit darker.
Bit darker. How so?
Well, we're lucky to have an expert with us that really dive deep into this. So with us is Professor Diane Perkins, who wrote Troublesome Things, A History of Fairies and Fairy Stories.
Well, some things, huh? I like that.
Right. So no sparkly wings and happy endings here.
Uh.
Professor Perkins shows how fairies were totally woven into daily life.
I see. Yeah, they weren't just like make-believe. They meant something.
Exactly. And especially when things were tough, changing, uncertain. Fairies were how folks made sense of it all.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. When you think about all the upheaval back then, all the changes happening.
Totally. You had religious stuff, political stuff, new worlds being discovered. Everything was being turned upside down.
And so fairies represented that feeling of everything being in flux, of not knowing what was coming next.
Yeah, so they weren't just chilling in the woods. They were more profound, right? Like symbols.
Exactly. Professor Perkins calls them gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers. Okay, I'm intrigued.
They were on the edge, between worlds. Life and death, what we know and what we don't, like right on that threshold.
It's like in your own life, those big moments, changing jobs, moving, even losing someone.
Yeah.
You're in between.
Yes, you're between what was and what's going to be. And fairies, they helped people deal with that, those huge, often scary feelings.
Okay, I can see that. Give me an example. How did that work in, everyday life?
Well, Professor Perkins talks about when a child died, which sadly was common back then, people said fairies took them.
Took them, kidnapped.
Not always literally took, more like spirited away, swapped, or lured to the fairy world. It was a way to handle that immense grief.
It's kind of sad, but I guess having some explanation, even a magical one, is better than nothing.
Right. It wasn't always about truly believing, but more about finding meaning in a world that felt random and cruel.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But these fairies, their power, wasn't always good, right? We said there was a dark side.
Oh, absolutely. They weren't just cute and helpful. They were powerful. They could grant favors, but usually for a price.
Ooh, and that price, that's where things get creepy, right? Especially in the Scottish witch trials.
Now that's where it gets interesting. We're going to get into how fairies and witchcraft were linked.
Okay, spill the tea. Tell me everything about fairies and witches.
So during these trials, women accused of witchcraft would often say they'd met with fairies.
I met with fairies.
And these fairies, they'd demand stuff in return for giving the women magical powers.
Stuff like what, a magic wand or something?
Well, sometimes it was harmless, like a song or dance, but other times it was way darker.
Darker how? Like what kind of demands?
There are stories of fairies wanting, sex, or even wanting a woman's child in exchange for magic.
Wow, that's intense and scary. Those women must felt so trapped.
Exactly. And the saddest part, the authorities, they didn't understand. They were so focused on witchcraft and the devil.
They missed the point entirely.
They didn't see fairies as complex beings, both good and bad. They saw them as demons, pure evil.
So instead of helping these women, they made it worse.
Yeah.
Their own beliefs were used against them.
Absolutely. It shows how those in power can be so blind to the actual experiences of people they see as different.
Yeah, that's powerful. And speaking of misinterpreting things, there's this whole thing about familiars.
Oh yeah, familiars, evil little pets, right?
That's what I thought, like a witch's sidekick. But you're saying there's a fairy connection there too.
You got it. Professor Perkins says what folks thought were demonic familiars were actually just household fairies.
Hold on, so having a pet cat could get you accused of witchcraft.
Pretty much. It shows how normal stuff, based on old beliefs and traditions, could get twisted into something sinister.
It's almost funny, but also super messed up. They were so desperate to prove witchcraft, they saw it everywhere.
It all comes back to fear, right? Fear of the unknown, and that need to control what we don't understand.
Which leads us to another freaky part of fairy lore, the changeling myth.
Ah, the changelings.
Okay, for those who haven't heard, imagine your sweet baby suddenly replaced by a creepy creature, a parent's worst nightmare.
Definitely nightmare fuel. But Professor Perkins links this to something real, something I'd argue a lot of parents feel.
And that is?
Maternal ambivalence.
Okay, gotta be honest. Not sure what that means.
It's like even the best parent has mixed feelings about their kids sometimes. Parenthood's hard, it's tiring,
Yeah, no kidding.
and sometimes you just feel overwhelmed, maybe a little resentful. You miss your old life.
Stuff people don't talk about much, especially back then.
Right. So the changeling myth, it was an outlet for those hidden feelings. Not that moms really thought their baby was swapped.
But it was a way to express those tough emotions they couldn't say out loud.
Exactly. Instead of, I'm so tired, it was, this isn't my kid, it's a monster.
A coping mechanism, huh? Deal with the feelings without breaking society's rules.
Exactly. But like a lot of fairy stuff, this had a dark side too. Some folks took it too far.
You're not talking about leaving babies in the woods for fairies to take back, are you?
Sadly, yeah. Some thought fairies would return the real child if the changeling was abandoned or they did special rituals.
And that's not just a story. It really happened, right?
Yeah.
There were some awful cases.
Yeah, there's that case Professor Perkins talks about, the one that always gives me chills.
The one with Bridget Cleary, right?
Yes. A young woman in Ireland, her husband, he truly believed she was the changeling, and he burned her alive.
It's terrifying that something like a fairy tale could lead to something so real, so tragic.
It shows how powerful these beliefs can be, especially when mixed with fear and desperation. It could lead to unimaginable acts.
Okay, so we've talked about fairies being like gatekeepers,
Yeah.
right? On the edge of things, all about change. And we've seen their darker side.
Yeah, the witchcraft connections, the misunderstandings, the fear.
But there's another side Professor Perkins talks about that I find fascinating. She compares fairies to lottery tickets.
Lottery tickets, now that's an interesting comparison. What makes you say that?
Think about it. Fairies represented the chance of something amazing happening. Sudden wealth, wishes granted, even going to a magical world.
You're right, I see the connection. It's that same hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll get lucky and everything will change.
Exactly. And this was huge during Elizabethan times.
Yeah.
Think of guys like Sir Francis Drake, went from nobody to sailing around the world.
And of course, Shakespeare. Not a fancy background, but revolutionized theater. Classic rags to riches stories.
And fairies, they were like the embodiment of that hope.
Yeah, they represented that chance encounter, finding treasure, a hidden talent, some magical person who changes your life.
It's wild how these beliefs show what people wanted back then, especially those stuck in their social class. No way to move up.
Fairies were hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change for the better.
It makes you wonder if we still want that lottery ticket solution today. That hope for something huge to come along and fix everything.
I think that desire to hope for the best is part of being human.
It's why we love stories of overnight success, finding $1 million, fate changing everything.
And maybe that's why we still find fairies so interesting, even now. They embody that hope, that magic, that chance for things to be different.
Totally. But speaking of change, we can't talk about fairies without Shakespeare. He had a huge impact, right?
Oh yeah, the bard himself. He definitely shaped how we see fairies today.
How so? What did he do?
Well, his plays, especially A Midsummer Night's Dream, gave us a new kind of fairy. Smaller, more fun, less scary.
Like less, I'll steal your baby, and more, I'll prank you with magic.
Exactly. Mischievous, playful, causing trouble, but mostly with enchantments and illusions.
So did he, like, tame the fairies, make them less intense?
Not completely. Even Shakespeare's fairies have a bit of wildness to them. They're not always good. There's still some danger there.
It's like he caught that change happening. Fairies going from powerful and scary to more whimsical, fun.
Exactly. It reflects how people's thinking was changing overall. More science, less fear of the unknown.
But even with all our science and tech today, we still like the unknown, right? There's that desire to believe in something more.
Oh, absolutely. Even in our modern world, there's a part of us that wants a little magic. A feeling that there's more than we understand.
Like that saying, the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
That's a good one.
So even if we don't believe in fairies like they did back then, isn't it still cool to explore those beliefs?
Absolutely. For them, fairies weren't just fantasy. They were how they dealt with life, with death, with the mysteries of the world.
And we still do that today, just in different ways, right?
Exactly.
So instead of fairies, we've got, what? Conspiracy theories? The lottery? Aliens?
Maybe. Or look at how interested people are in ghosts, UFOs, all that stuff. We still want to believe there's more out there.
Like we need that wonder, that possibility of something beyond the everyday to make sense of it all.
I think you're onto something there. And looking at these old stories, these beliefs, that seem so out there to us now. It helps us connect with that feeling.
It's like going back in time, not just for facts, but to understand how they felt, how they found meaning in a world that could be so confusing.
Exactly. It's about the power of stories, how they help us understand what it means to be human.
So even if we don't believe in fairies literally, maybe there's a lesson there, that there's magic in the everyday, in the stuff we don't get, in just looking at the world with curiosity.
I love that. It's about being open to what we don't understand, to that sense of wonder.
So, after this deep dive into the world of fairies, what do you think? Any new thoughts? See any of those old beliefs in our own world? Tell us. And if you're ready for more hidden history and culture, don't forget to subscribe. The next deep dive is waiting.
Absolutely. Even in our modern world, there's a part of us that wants a little magic, a feeling that there's more than we understand.
Like that saying, the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
That's a good one.
So even if we don't believe in fairies like they did back then, isn't it still cool to explore those beliefs?
Absolutely. For them, fairies weren't just fantasy. They were how they dealt with life, with death, with the mysteries of the world.
And we still do that today, just in different ways, right?
Exactly.
So instead of fairies, we've got, what, conspiracy theories? The lottery? Aliens?
Maybe. Or look at how interested people are in ghosts, UFOs, all that stuff. We still want to believe there's more out there.
Like we need that wonder, that possibility of something beyond the everyday to make sense of it all.
I think you're onto something there. And looking at these old stories, these beliefs that seem so out there to us now, it helps us connect with that feeling.
It's like going back in time, not just for facts, but to understand how they felt, how they found meaning in a world that could be so confusing.
Exactly. It's about the power of stories, how they help us understand what it means to be human.
So even if we don't believe in fairies literally,
Yeah.
maybe there's a lesson there, that there's magic in the everyday, and the stuff we don't get, in just looking at the world with curiosity.
I love that. It's about being open to what we don't understand, to that sense of wonder.
So after this deep dive into the world of fairies, what do you think? Any new thoughts?
Yeah.
See any of those old beliefs in our own world? Tell us. And if you're ready for more hidden history and culture, don't forget to subscribe. The next deep dive is waiting.
Yeah, and I think it kind of ties into what we were discussing earlier, about those anxieties and hopes and stuff.
Totally.
So, like, we've talked about fairies being these gatekeepers, right? Like, they're all about change and liminality and all that.
Yeah, and we've gone into how they can be kind of scary, too.
The whole witchcraft thing.
Yeah, the misunderstandings and fear and all that.
Right, exactly. But there's this other aspect that Professor Perkins talks about that I think is super interesting.
What's that?
She compares fairies to, like, lottery tickets.
Lottery tickets. Okay, that sounds kind of random, but I'm listening.
So think about it, right? Fairies represented this possibility that your luck could change like that.
Okay, yeah, I see it.
They could give you riches or grant your wishes or even, take you to some magical land.
It's that hope that maybe, just maybe, things could suddenly get better.
Exactly. And this idea was really powerful during the Elizabethan era, when social and economic mobility was a big thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It was the time of explorers like Sir Francis Drake who came from nothing and ended up sailing around the world.
And of course, Shakespeare.
Exactly.
Mm.
From humble beginnings to changing the world of theater forever.
Those classic rags to riches stories.
Right, and fairies kind of embodied that aspiration.
So for people who are stuck in a rigid social system with very few opportunities to improve their lives.
Fairies offered a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, like a chance for a radical transformation, even if it was a long shot.
Exactly. It was a way to dream of a better life.
It makes you wonder, don't you think, if we still have that same yearning for a lottery ticket solution today?
Oh, absolutely. I think that desire is deeply human.
It's why we're so drawn to stories of overnight success or unexpected windfalls. That idea that fate could intervene and change everything.
Exactly. And maybe that's why fairies continue to fascinate us even centuries later.
They represent that enduring hope, that belief in the possibility of magic and transformation.
For sure. But speaking of transformation, we can't really discuss how fairies have evolved without talking about Shakespeare's influence.
Ah, yes. The bard himself.
Yeah.
How did he shape our perception of fairies?
Well, his plays, and especially A Midsummer Night's Dream, introduced a new kind of fairy to the world.
Oh, really? How so?
They were smaller, more whimsical, and less menacing.
So, less likely to steal your baby and more likely to play a harmless prank on you.
Exactly. They were mischievous, playful, capable of causing trouble, but ultimately more inclined towards enchantment and illusion.
So did Shakespeare tame the fairies then?
Well, not entirely. Even Shakespeare's fairies retain a hint of wildness, a touch of the unpredictable.
So they're not entirely benign.
Exactly. There's still an element of danger lurking beneath the surface.
It's like he captured that transition in our understanding of fairies, that shift from powerful and potentially dangerous beings to something more whimsical and entertaining.
Precisely, and that shift reflects a broader cultural trend, a move towards a more rational scientific worldview, where the unknown was less something to be feared and more something to be explored and categorized.
But even in our modern scientific world, don't we still have that fascination with the unknown? That desire to believe in something beyond our understanding?
Oh, absolutely. I think that yearning for a little bit of magic never truly goes away.
It's like we need that sense of wonder, that possibility of something more, to make life a little more bearable, a little more exciting.
I agree. And, exploring these old beliefs, these stories about fairies, it allows us to tap into that sense of wonder, to connect with that part of ourselves that yearns for something beyond the ordinary.
It's a good reminder that even if we don't believe in fairies, literally, there's still a lot we can learn from those who did.
Absolutely. Their beliefs offer a fascinating window into the human experience.
They show us how people in the past dealt with life's challenges, how they found hope and meaning in a world that could often be chaotic and unpredictable.
And I think those are lessons that are still relevant today.
So next time you're out in nature, maybe take a moment to remember those old stories about fairies.
Who knows, maybe you'll sense a little bit of that magic yourself.
And if you enjoy this deep dive into the world of fairies, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more explorations of history and culture.
There's a whole world of fascinating stories waiting to be uncovered.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.